Welcome to Mets Hot Stove with your hosts, Rob and CP, the go-to podcast for all your New York Mets news and rumors.
What's up, Mets fans? Welcome back to Mets Hot Stove episode 3. How is everybody doing here tonight on this Tuesday, November 11th? So we are in the offseason and we're waiting for what the Mets are going to do this offseason as they have a lot of work to do. Chris, how you doing, buddy?
I'm doing well. It's good to get back up on here on stream. I've been doing some videos on my channel talking about the hot stove, the early off-season rumors, basically doing videos daily as reports are coming out. We got the GM meetings going on right now until the 13th, a couple more days of that. And we are slowly awaiting the MLB winter meetings coming up starting in, I think December 8th it is. So we're getting there. We're getting there. It's still the early off season. The reports are just starting to circulate. And I think since the last time both you and I have been on a stream, we have a lot to talk about. A lot of stuff has come out. So I can't wait for it. Let's do it.
Yeah, and the last time we did an episode of the hot stove. We talked that we were gonna, we were talking about coaching staff. There was a couple of guys getting fired, and we all thought Antoine Richardson was going to be the guy to stick around because he had the best year as a coach. And unfortunately, that did not happen. So I guess we'll get into that a little bit before we get into the real free agency trade rumors, as well as, of course, David Stern also spoke as well. So we all know now that Antoine Richardson and Jeremy Hefner are now with the Atlanta Braves. Go figure. They stay in the NL East and they go to our division foes. And everybody was like, okay, seriously. But we all knew that Jeremy Hefner in itself, this guy was very popular around the league. This is why this guy stood with the Mets through 3 regimes and kept his job, because he was a hot commodity. And that is something that the Mets don't have a lot of the times when it comes to coaching or managerial guys in their organization. And Jeremy Hefner was somebody that we knew was going to get a job rather quickly in Major League Baseball. But with Antoine Richardson and the weird, I guess, back and forth when it came to negotiations, when it comes to his contract, his benefits, and all that stuff. And it ultimately apparently came down to money when it came to Antoine Richardson. And we're not talking about millions of dollars here. We're probably talking about 25, 50, or maybe 100 grand. And the Mets were like, no. And then Richardson was like, all right, the hell with you guys. And he joins Jeremy Hefner in the Atlanta Braves. Chris, what are your thoughts about this? As this is kind of an odd situation when the best coach on this team that kind of changed something that the Mets did not do well, and that was stolen bases, made guys that really don't steal bases, and it was a benefit. The few benefits the Mets had this year was stolen bases. What are your thoughts on this, and do you feel some type of way about it?
It's just strange, like you said. I think that's just the best word to characterize this situation with Antoine Richardson specifically. It's just strange, right? I mean, at first it came down to the salary. The Mets, were apart with him on the salary, is what Antoine Richardson said directly in the quote that he gave to a reporter, and that's what was being reported. So he goes back to the rest of the league, fields offers, gets an offer from the Braves, I'm assuming. And at that point, the secondary differential in comparison to the original deal that the Mets had on the table for Richardson was that they couldn't offer him a pension at that point, right? And so, first of all, I didn't even know that as a rule with the MLB that certain organizations have certain pensions, an amount of pensions that they're allowed to give out. And so that's also a factor here as well. So, I think the common denominator with this all and this process is that the salary, how can you be apart on salary originally with the guy that a lot of people around this league have been giving solely the credit to the successes of the stolen bases of the New York Mets in 2025? That's the thing that strikes me as a little bit weird. And the other thing is that the timing of the other coaching staff hires too, especially with Kai Correa that we talked about the last go around, they were very quick to hire a guy like Kai Correa. And so there was a lot of speculation whether Richardson was going to want to go elsewhere for a bench coaching role, etc. We know that he's not going to be a bench coach in the Braves organization. He's going to be a first base coach again over there. And so it's just things just don't align with the timeline, right? If you lose Antoine Richardson, that's fine. but I just don't know if they gave and put their best foot forward in terms of retaining the guy. Now, on the flip side, we talk about this all the time, Rob, especially you. You always say, and we both agree on this. I don't go against you here in the fact that these coaches, the ones that got let go, and I'm sure the ones that are getting brought on board right now, they're scapegoats, right? The real indicator of a successful team or lack thereof is going to be the performance on the field by the players. So theoretically, Antoine Richardson and Jeremy Hefner and Mr. Gibbons, who stepped down as bench coach as well, these guys are not to blame or solely give credit for the successes or failures of the 2025 New York Mets. So how much of a difference should it actually make is besides the point. I think that this change right here, it sucks because I think we all wanted Richardson back. I think that that was the one coach that we were like, okay, screw the rest. We want Richardson back because Juan Soto had a successful year. Lindor also 30-30. Like it was just all up and down the board successes on the base paths. But at the end of the day, it's taking a little bit of attention away from what the real issue or the real solution maybe is going to be this offseason. And that's that David Stearns needs to build a competent roster. That's the thing, first and foremost, that we should be talking about instead of these coaching changes that are taking place. Because at the end of the day, wins and losses are not like they're determined maybe by the manager. The coaches, I don't really think so much. I think we both agree that the players on the field have the greatest impact. So I just think that it's been a little bit of a distractor here early in this off season. And so it sucks, but you know what? I'm not going to think too much about it. We talked about it, and that's that.
Yeah, I think coaching staffs are highly overrated. I think players make good managers. If I know we're not talking about the Yankees here, but when the Yankees hired Joe Torre, it was Clueless Joe that was on the back pages when the Yankees hired him, and he was part of a dynasty. So, I honestly don't think it really matters, especially nowadays when everything's so collaborative, everything's analytics. The managers are not what managers used to be in the dugout, and I don't think that it's that big of a deal. I think hitting coaches are overrated. I think first base, third base coaches are overrated. Do I think Antoine Richardson deserved to be back, and the Mets should have at least tried harder? It didn't seem like they tried hard enough and didn't. And this is the problem that I have with David Stearns. Again, he can have a great offseason and he'll shut my mouth. But I think David Stearns thinks that he's the genius with everything. Anything that's positive is his credit. And anything that goes negative is everybody else's problem. And they get the consequences, just like this year, where he basically fired a whole coaching staff. And as I said during the season, this coaching staff was going to be the scapegoat because Stearns wasn't going anywhere. We felt that Mendoza was not going to get fired after one good year, one bad year. It felt like Stearns is also going to give him at least one more year, or at least 60 to 80 games before he makes a decision if the Mets should retain him throughout the season. But overall, when it comes to the coaching staff, it is what it is. I just don't think. I think the reason why the Mets lost this year and didn't make the playoffs was the pitching. And I don't care what you think of Hefner. Hefner was not going to make the difference of Frankie Montas pitching well, or any other garbage pitcher that Stearns decided to get here and make them any better. I don't. In 2024 was an anomaly, and I think 2025 caught up to us. And I don't care what type of pitching lab you have. When you have bad pitchers, they usually end up being bad pitchers. So that is something that I think is well overrated when it comes to coaching staffs. And again, we'll see how this new coaching staff is with Mendoza. Again, it's not Mendoza's guys once again, if that matters to you. I think it kind of does. It's kind of, the lame duck manager, has Kai Correa over his shoulder waiting to take his job. That's the way it feels. But it is what it is. This is what David Stearns does, and we have to deal with it. But it doesn't matter about the coaching staff. It's all about the players. And when we get into the news about posted players, these Japanese players, Munetaka Murakami and Tatsuya Imai posted over the last couple of days. These two guys were highly regarded, or at least Murakami we heard a lot more of, but Imai is a type of pitcher that could be at the top of your rotation, or at least a solid number 2 or 3. That's where he's projected. He's not as high as Yamamoto, but he's kind of, probably, I would say, second tier to that. I think he's better than Kodai Senga, if anybody cares about that. But what are your thoughts on these two posted guys? There's a lot of weird rumors coming out with Murakami about him not hitting fastballs. We'll get into the average really quickly, and I know you brought that up. I think you tweeted about it, if I'm not mistaken, or if it's somebody else. But I know you talked about it. You brought it up somewhere about he's not very good at hitting high velocity fastballs. But what are your thoughts on these two guys getting posted, and who do you think the Mets are more likely to go after?
I don't listen. First of all, Murakami, and then I know the guy who hasn't been posted yet, but Okamoto also is kind of in that same range that we talked about that Murakami's in. I think Okamoto is actually going to be better than Murakami, even though Murakami seems to be getting a lot more hype. But Murakami is not coming to the Mets. Let's just get this out of the way right now. I even think Will Salmon put out something in an article talking about both Murakami and Okamoto not being at the forefront of the Mets' interest. This offseason, whether it's a combination of just the player profile, the skill set that they've evaluated, or the fact that they know, especially in the case of Murakami, that he wants to either be a Yankee or just go to the West Coast, like a lot of these other Japanese players in recent history, right? And so the one player that we have actually heard about is Amai, and we haven't really talked about him all that much because let's face it, I mean, he hasn't garnered as much attention as Okamoto and Murakami, but this guy's talented. I mean, you're right. I don't think that he is a front line starter, at least not right away, but he's more of a mid-level rotation guy. And I think that no matter what, and I think that we should get into Kodai Senga as well, because there's a lot of rumors swirling about him. And I'm sure that we will, because I think the goal of this offseason for the Mets is that a decision has to be made. Are you keeping Senga or are you not? And if you are keeping Senga, he needs to be a bottom of the rotation guy. And you need to create a flexible, deep rotation to where you can have Kodai Senga be a fifth or sixth starter in the back end instead of the front end. I think a guy like Amai would definitely help that case, but he wouldn't be the only one that needs to come over to Queens. I mean, there need to be at least one or two more guys that come over, at least one more, especially given the young talent that you have already with Tong. And the caliber of that pitcher that comes over also is a direct reflection on maybe a Sproat or Jonah Tong trade if you're going after the premier talent like a guy like Scooble, who we haven't talked about in a while as well. But yeah, I mean, 95, mid-90s fastball for Amai. He's got a 6-pitch mix, which is good. I think that anytime you see a guy coming over from another league over to the MLB, the transition period, especially for the hitters, like you said, with the high velocity fastballs, Murakami does not fare well with fastballs, and the average is pretty ugly on fastballs over 93 miles per hour distinctly, which a lot of pitches he's going to see in the major leagues is going to be over 93 miles per hour. So that's going to be an adjustment period, right? And the pitchers, the same thing. But with the pitchers, the more of an arsenal that you have at your disposal, like Amai does with this 6-pitch mix that these scouts are talking about, the better of a chance you are going to adjust quicker to the league, just simply by throwing opposing hitters off and keeping them guessing. And so that's what I like about, I guess, the outlook of him. I think I'm still going to have to do some digging in terms of, more scouting reports and getting into the nitty gritty of the statistics. But I think he's coming off of one of his best seasons, if not his best season of his career last year, posting like 1.92 in the ERA category, something like that. It was a really good year for him. I think he's 27 years old as well. So not quite the age of what Kodai Senga was when he came over to the major leagues. And I think that would make all the difference in the world. So clearly the Mets and David Stearns have evaluated Amai. They're interested, and they will be in play for him. But Murakami, definitely not. I would have thought that the Mets would be taking a look at Okamoto given the Pete Alonso situation, regardless of how that's going to play out. That could be a secondary option because he does play third and first base, but apparently Murakami and Okamoto are very highly unlikely for the New York Mets as opposed to Tetsuya Imai. So I'm excited though. I mean, the pitching is definitely going to need to be a stressor. And in the early goings of this offseason with the rumors, it seems like with all the reports from Salmon, Nightingale, etc., David Stearns is very committed to bringing 1 to 2 high-end frontline starters into this rotation. He just needs to go out there and do the thing now.
Yeah, you're spot on with my 27 years old, 1.92 ERA this year. And the sweet spot for pitching, he threw 163 and 2/3 innings, which is like the sweet spot now in a lot of these rotations where they like their pitchers to be at a certain inning. So he's right on par with that. And, when you talk about Murakami, I don't think it's a chance the Mets are going to get him because, I mean, you can always use Murakami as a DH, but when you hit that high velocity, he has under 100 average with a fastball over 93 miles an hour. That's a dangerous game to play in Major League Baseball when basically 95%, maybe even more, throw over 93 miles an hour. And that's a scary proposition when you're looking for a big bat to come over, especially if he might replace Pete Alonso, as we'll talk about Pete Alonso a little later. That's worrisome to me. 265 home runs, 273 career average. He was hurt this year with an oblique, only played 69 games. Something to worry about with him. I don't think he's on the radar. I think, obviously he was the high price guy that everybody was talking about in Japan. But Okamoto, I think, is the probably only position player option for the Mets if they happen to go that route. But he's not posted yet, so I think the Mets aren't even thinking about that yet until he is posted. When he has that 45-day window once he's posted to sign a deal, and that's when I think the Mets would worry about it. So listen, I'm all on board. Amaya is probably not going to be a number one or a number two, but definitely a number three. If he's cheaper than a Valdez or a Cease, yeah, you can spend money on that and do it that way, but that's something we'll have to wait and see. And yeah, Stearns, I believe, is going to go after two high-end starting pitchers, which is kind of, shocking to me because that's going on the opposite direction that I think David Stearns would ever go into when it comes to pitching. But I think he actually realized that you can't do this nonsense you did in Milwaukee and have it work, especially when you have a high payroll, when you have more money than anybody else. This is something that you have to make sure you have to change up your philosophy just a little bit. Even if you still want to use it in the back end of your rotation, even in your bullpen. But when it comes to your top two guys, I think you got to be smart about who you bring in here. And don't tell me Minaya is your number two starting the season because I'll go ape shit, and I'm not in the mood to go ape shit so early in this offseason when it comes to David Stearns. But we'll definitely see what he's going to do with these two posted players. So listen, and I know the comments are flying off the rails right now, and it's always great to be back and see all the comments and all the people that wondering if I fell off the face of the earth, but I didn't. But we'll definitely see if Amai is an option for the New York Mets. When it comes to the Mets rotation and Kodai Senga, Chris kind of hinted at Kodai Senga a little bit. The trade interest for Kodai Senga is obviously pretty high. I don't think anybody thinks otherwise. I think that you can I'm not saying you're going to get a nice package or, a big package for Kodai Senga, but I think you can definitely maybe get a reliever, maybe get maybe a mid-level prospect that could, bolster your farm system to make even a bigger trade, something like that, where you might have a team that you want to trade for a starting pitcher, and that team really likes a player on another team or a prospect on another team. You can get him for Kodai Senga, and you can work out a deal for a starting pitcher. I know that's thinking a lot outside the box, but when it comes to the interest from Kodai Senga, I don't think anybody's surprised by that. He is a really good pitcher, but he's not trustworthy, at least for the New York Mets. Not at the top of the level rotation that we were expecting him to be a big part of. The trustworthy factor, the giving up on your team at the end of the year when you technically weren't injured, but you didn't feel quote unquote comfortable with your mechanics or whatever it was, you weren't injured and you gave up on your team when they desperately needed started pitching. I don't think Kodai Senga can be a part of this team. I know Stearns talked about Kodai Senga being a part of this rotation in one of his interviews. I think that's all bullshit. I think that's trying to hype up a pitcher that they clearly don't want. They lost favor with him. You saw that at the end of the year. I mean, he wasn't even a thought to pitch the last final few games of the year. That's a joke when this guy was supposed to be a top two pitcher in your rotation. I think you need to trade him. I don't think you should worry about what you might have to get back for him. I think you have to make this deal, especially if you're going to revamp this rotation the way we hope that David Stearns is going to do. Your thoughts on Kodai Senga and the possible trade interest for him, Chris?
I also think that this directly has an impact It's related to what the Mets' plans are, whether they're gonna really go all out in the trade market for that true ace, like a Tariq Skubal, right? Because, if you trade for Skubal, you are going to be putting together a hefty package, and one of those names probably is gonna be Brandon Sproat or Jonah Tong, among other prospects and MLB-ready talent going back in return to the Detroit Tigers. And so, by process of elimination, if you send over one of those guys, then maybe they do have and will make room for Kodai Senga in the back end of this rotation. But I think no matter how you shake it out, exactly what you just said and exactly what I said a couple minutes ago is that, at this point, I don't care if he's a part of the Mets in 2026 or not. I would be happy to have him in the back end of the rotation if that's what David Stern's plan is. But I also wouldn't even bat an eye if they decided to let him go for whatever value. And apparently, the report is that the Mets know that they're not expecting that much in return for him. I mean, this guy's a 1-year rental at this point, with the way his contract shakes out. So the Mets know that they're not really going to be getting much in return in terms of value. And it's just if they're okay with that or not. You talk about a guy that maybe could be an innings eater. I mean, we talk about those types of guys all the time, but to the same degree, like you just said, a guy that had a really good first half. I mean, I think with what happened in the second half, a lot of Mets fans, and myself included sometimes, always get lost in that. I mean, this guy had a really solid first half, and it really came down to that injury where Pete Alonso overthrew him and he came back, and hurt his hamstring. He just wasn't the same since that. But this is a guy that also just has so many limitations and so many needs that he has to fulfill and this team has to fulfill for him to go out there and be his very best. And I also do think that is a very bad look for him in this organization that he was injured but not injured at the same time and was just rehabbing in Florida trying to get back on track while the Mets were flailing and eventually didn't make the playoffs. So this is kind of 50-50 for me right now. I think that there's justification either way, whether they keep him or trade him. And like I said, I don't really care which direction the Mets go, but they cannot have him. They cannot explain to us when the season comes around and spring training starts that, oh, listen, Kodai Senga, the injuries are past him. He's going to be our number 2 or number 3. No, he's a number 4. He's a number 5. He could even be a flex number 6. And that's just at this point of his career where he's at, and given the injuries, that's the extent of how much I trust Kodai Senga. So I also think that there's certain parallels to this as well, where, like I just mentioned, it's about what the other plans are to backfill the front of the rotation and whether you have and will have the young talent still around after those trades, or are the Mets just going to go out there in free agency and sign a guy like Amai and take a chance on a guy like, I don't know, Framber Valdez or Dylan Cease, like you just mentioned as well. But if the Mets really want to get serious, if David Stearns really wants to show this fan base that he's serious, yeah, I mean, I'll take Dylan Cease or Zach Gallen on a rental deal, right? 1 year, prove it year. Cease is coming off of a bad year with an ERA over 4. I think Zach Gallen, same thing. Like, that's fine. We know what those guys have been in the past, but that's also just like repeating what they did in 2024 with Luis Severino, et cetera, and hoping that they get the best out of those guys. And that's fine if they're hoping for a repeat of that under David Stearns, because he's shown the ability to get those types of guys in the doors and have success. But I'm kind of tired of that. And I think this fan base should be tired of that. We need the premier guys. We need the premier talent. If there is an ace, whether his name is Scooble, whether his name is, I know it's probably unlikely, but Skeens, or whether you can go and contact the Mariners, right, and trade for one of their guys because they have a plethora of talented pitching over there. You need to get premier pitching in the doors. I'm tired of these 1-year rental deals just because the value is there. In the long run, when the playoffs come around, Rob, you say this all the time. Guys like that fizzle out.
Yep.
Guys that have had bad years in recent years tend to fizzle out, no matter if they post a rebound year during the regular season or not. So that's my primary concern, especially if the Mets go the free agent route, because we all know the type of pitching that's available or could be available to them on the trade block. And I think that if you're going the free agent route outside of a guy like Amai, who's not even projected to be a frontline starter anyways, he's more of a mid-level rotation guy. You're talking about Cease, Gallen, Framber Valdez, and maybe a handful of others. I just don't think those guys' ceilings are high enough to help this Mets rotation rebound, as opposed to going out there and getting a true solid ace. So hopefully that makes sense. I'm saying this in a roundabout way. I just think that David Stearns needs to get out of this like prove it year. Like, let's get the most out of these guys for 1 year, and then let's let them walk in free agency after that happens. And I'm just tired of that merry-go-round happening.
Yeah, I think when you're in a big market, you shouldn't be, signing Frankie Montas, Griffin Cannons. You shouldn't be signing 3 or 4 guys that come into your rotation and you're counting on them big time. I think Sean Manaea was a reclamation project and they treated him like an ace. And I thought it was stupid. I thought it was a bad idea saying that Sean Manaea was your ace. I think you had to bring somebody in here that was a big name to compensate for Sean Manaea and Kodai Senga. And what is also interesting is the fact that when he said about Kodai Senga is that the problem with Kodai Senga isn't what he can do on the mound. It's just to get him on the mound, you need the rest of your rotation to abide by his rules. There's a lot of pitchers in baseball that don't like extra days off. There's a lot of pitchers that don't want to go every 6th day. These guys are accustomed to going every 5th day, a lot of these guys. And then when you try to change it in the season, and they're not doing well, you're hurting your other pitchers to abide by for Kodai Senga just to make him get on the mound. Not that he'll pitch well or not that he'll stay healthy, but just to get him on the mound. We know we can't pitch every 5th day. That's the problem. And even with him not pitching, if him pitching well or not, or keeping him healthy, those two are obviously important when they get on the mound. But what annoys me is that we have to change the rotation around and say, hey, whoever's in the rotation, we need you to, not pitch every 5th day, but pitch every 6th day because you want to give Kodai Senga an extra day rest. You can't do that for just one guy. If you have a bunch of guys that all need extra days off, then you go to a 6-man rotation. Then you use Kodai. Then Kodai Senga can make sense more to what you're trying to do with this rotation and extra days off. I think it's a huge mistake to still worry about. The Mets can't worry about, well, if Kodai Senga is in this rotation. This is why the Mets have a very important early offseason. They got to make decision on guys. They got to know if they're going to be going for 2 top-line starters, they need to know, go after 2 top-line starters. This can't, prolong through the offseason. And then you're leaning towards spring training and you still got Kodai Senga on your team and you got a bunch of other guys in this rotation. I don't think you can be worried about Kodai Senga a part of this rotation. I think you should go with Nolan McLean as one of your top starters, whatever it might be. If he's the number 2, whatever you wanted to think about. It's Nolan McLean, and do what you need to do at the top of your rotation and worry about to mid to the back end of the rotation a little bit later on. I think that's what you have to do. And the Mets can actually do it. When people are like, they're not going to get two top-line starters, why not? It's not like they have to spend on Dylan Cease and Framber Valdez because there's nobody in the trade market. There's like 5 guys in the trade market that are top-line starters you can get. There's multiple guys, a guy like Robert Suarez, a guy who can definitely be a guy who can be at the top end of the rotation. And he's young too, which is interesting. That's a guy that you can look at if they don't want to go the Valdez Cease route. But those are guys also in the free agent market. So the Mets can spend big on one pitcher and make a big trade for another pitcher. And now you can transition Nolan McLean and not have so much pressure on him going into the season. Now, I think Nolan McLean can handle it, but I don't want him pitching on opening day. I'm sorry. I just don't. I don't think, 10 starts, 8, 9 starts he had at the end of the year is going to make me feel confident that, okay, Nolan McLean's going to lead this rotation like Jacob deGrom did. I'm just not going there anymore. If he's a part of a big-time rotation, great. That's why I think a guy like Freddie Peralta or Sandy Alcantara are guys that are more likely in the trade market, along with Tarek Skubal. I do think those 2 guys are more likely only because Freddie Peralta is his last year of his deal, so you can transition McLean into getting more experience this year with Freddie Peralta leading the rotation, and on top of that, you don't have to worry about 6-7 years down the line with Freddie Peralta if you don't want to re-sign him. Same thing goes for Sandy Alcantara. I know he has a couple of years left, but he's not making $30+ million. He's in the 22 to 25 range when it comes to salary for the next couple of years. And he's a guy that's still a very good pitcher that can be at the top of your rotation along with Nolan McLean. And you don't have to, Alcantara is going to cost you, but it probably won't cost you what it would take to get Tarek Skubal. And that is something that you also have to look at. So the options out there in the free agent market and the trade market shouldn't be overwhelming for David Stearns to bring in 2 top 3 starters to add to Nolan McLean. And then you fizzle out your rotation in the back end with a Peterson, with Senga if he's still around, or if you really think Sproat it can be ready for the rotation to start the season, he can be your 5th guy. Brandon Sproat shouldn't be one of your main guys coming into the season. It would be stupid to do that. So many different ways the Mets can go, but I think with Kodai Senga, he shouldn't be a part. Your mindset shouldn't say, okay, he's going to be one of our 5 guys or 6 guys in our rotation. I think you have to trade him. I don't think we saw the team and the organization fall out of favor with him at the end of the year. They didn't even want to talk about him when reporters were asking him about, hey, is Senga going to start one of these last few games when you really needed the starter? No, we had to have a broken down Sean Manaea at the end of the year, and we know how that turned out. So there's too many things, too many options for the Mets for them to not do what they need to do with this rotation. And I hope David Stearns changes his philosophy a little bit. I'm not saying sign Valdez, sign Cease, and go crazy. I think that's a little crazy for a guy in Valdez that we saw his emotions get the best of him on the mound. He's a really damn good pitcher, but I think he's a little bit of a question mark in my opinion. I think a guy like Dylan Cease is a smart signing if you want to go after him, but I think you also would have to trade for Freddie Peralta. Because if you can sign one guy and trade for one guy, you're not overly spending on prospects and you're not overly spending on multiple pitchers at the top end of your rotation, Chris. So it's going to be very interesting what the Mets are going to do with Kodai Senga. But in my opinion, they need to trade him. I don't think there's any way about it.
If you just to say, I mean, I know it's November 11th, it's still super early, but if the Mets walked away this offseason by trading for Peralta, like you just said, I mean, the package doesn't matter at this point. Whatever the package is, they land Peralta and they signed Amai, and everything else remains consistent. Are you happy with that or no?
I wouldn't be overly ecstatic, but there's not a lot of guys better in this rotation than Peralta. And I think Amai, you can put, slot him in at like a number 3 or 4 and make him work his way in. And I think he'll be fine. I think, having a guy like Peralta, who is a really good pitcher, I don't think he's a top level ace, but I think he's right there with him and Nolan McLean. I think it's a good combination. I think it really is. And, him being in a contract year, I think that's a great trade to make. And I don't think you have to give him as much as like a Tariq Skubal or even Sandy Alcantara for that matter. So I would be okay with that. I'm not going to be overly excited, but the interest in Amai and see what he can do, I think would be. I would be all right with that. I mean, I'm not going to be. I wouldn't be like, oh my God, this is the New York Mets. But I would be pretty excited that that's a rotation that I say, okay, this is a rotation that we can go to war with, in my opinion.
Yeah, I think I could live with that as well if that ended up being the results. And Freddie Peralta is the guy that I talked about on my channel as well. And it's just like, we've been talking about him for the past couple of off seasons and speculation of, when or if the Brewers would get rid of him. And I think that, with the type of season, the regular season, because he did, kind of flounder a little bit in the playoffs when the Brewers got there, but he posted really good numbers in the regular season. And I think that this is the time where they can get the most value in return for him. And we know the Brewers are an organization that always just think about the value of certain players, and they're not going to offer the big bucks to pretty much anybody outside of maybe like Jackson Chourio when they can get the most value out of him before he even stepped onto a major league roster, right, in the Major League Diamond. So, yeah, I don't know. I think I'd be okay with that. I think it'd be like a little bit underwhelming compared to like the standards, but definitely better than what we had in 2025, and definitely a better rotation on paper going into the season that we've had for the past few seasons. So, yeah, I think I'd be okay with that as well.
Well, it's also would be because I think it would be a decent offseason for the rotation is that I don't think all Sandy Alcantara, Joe Ryan, and Tariq Skubal are all going to be traded in the offseason. I think there'll be at least one left, possibly two. I think there's going to be two guys still left on their same team in the offseason. And I think the trade deadline is going to be a big deal with those two guys, or at least one of them. I could see one of them, possibly two of them getting traded in the offseason, but I think one's still going to be sticking around. And I think that if the Mets need a big time arm for whatever reason, you can go get him at the trade deadline. I know Stearns has underwhelmed at the trade deadline, but that is also an option as well. That's why I wouldn't get overly, I'm not going to be ecstatic, but I think it would be a solid offseason, depending on what they do with the position players, as we'll get into later in the stream as well. Because I think the position players is obviously a big time need as well, as the Mets have multiple holes, which is another interesting thing that we'll talk about. And, the next topic is definitely my favorite topic of all of them because it's Pete Alonso. I mean, who does not want to talk about Pete Alonso with me? I think it's probably the best thing for the New York Mets is me talking about Pete Alonso. Not that anybody cares what I have to say about Pete Alonso, but I get hate all the time from the Pete Alonso, fan club when it comes to Pete Alonso. And, that's why, as the topic on the bottom says, Mets want Alonso back if. This is clear from multiple reports. And around the league, people are saying the same thing, that the Mets don't want Pete Alonso to be the everyday first baseman for 162 games. They just don't want him to do so because he's not a good defensive first baseman. I'm sorry to say, he can scoop a ball with the best of them. And yes, he probably saves a lot of errors for a lot of guys. But if you listen to, I think it was either Eric Chavez or another coach that is currently on I think it was John, Gibbons that was on Foul Territory not too long ago, that the Mets actually planned when they did their defensive drills to throw the ball more in the grass to get a better hop. And I know, because it does speed up the ball when you skip it. I know that's crazy to think, but that was like one of their defensive drills that they worked on in spring training was to throw the ball before it hit the lip of the dirt and skip it on the grass because it's an easier play for the first baseman. And I don't know if that's something because it just happened to work out that way or that was an actual plan. Again, I don't know. I'd rather you just throw it, a dart against straight across the diamond, but to each their own. Pete Alonso has a problem throwing the baseball. And he had a terrible defensive month with throwing the baseball and catching the ball for the most part in September last year. And it was a big reason why the Mets lost a lot of games when they should have won these games. He wasn't the sole reason, but the defense was not good. And there's a big reason why, again, there's no conversation of Pete Alonso, who had a great offensive year, in the MVP conversation. A lot of people would believe that Pete Alonso had a better year overall than Juan Soto, but yet Juan Soto is going to get MVP votes when Pete Alonso will not. And that is something that you always have to look at when people are looking around the league about Pete Alonso. And don't think for a second that the Mets organization doesn't think very similar to what around the league thinks with Pete Alonso. Pete Alonso has an emotional attachment. That is all. And we have to understand that when it comes to Pete Alonso, right? Do I think Pete Alonso should be here on a team-friendly deal? I don't think you can give him more than 4 years. I'm sorry. And the only way I give him more than 4 years, if he's willing to be a part-time DH. And I know that was talked about in reports as well. That is what I want. Because when we talk about somebody later in the show, he's a better fit for the New York Mets. Even if you do bring back Pete Alonso, but definitely if you don't bring back Pete Alonso, he'll be a perfect fit, and we'll talk about that in a little later. But Pete Alonso is a guy that we all love to bat. But you also lose a lot with him as well. And when they talk about a culture shift within the organization, he is the unfortunate scapegoat in this malaise of players because there isn't a lot of guys you can take off the team. Nimmo has a no-trade clause. Jeff McNeil is probably going to be off this team. Pete Alonso is the easiest one to get rid of when it comes to the core guys. And unfortunately, he didn't sign that 7-year deal a couple of years ago. That's on him. That is not on the New York Mets. And they also overpaid for him make him the highest paid first baseman before Guerrero signed his massive deal. So they gave him respect by giving him that massive 2-year deal, 3-year deal, but 1-year deal with the average annual value being the highest out of all first basemen. So they gave him the respect and they gave him the option to opt out, which the Mets did not have to do. So they gave him multiple options for a couple of years now. It's on him now to decide if he wants to be a New York Met, not the New York Mets saying Pete Alonso needs to be a New York Met long term, because he should not be priority number 1, should not be priority number 2. And you know what? To be honest, I don't even know if he's priority number 3 at this point, unfortunately. Pete Alonso cannot let, or the Mets can't let Pete Alonso dictate their offseason like it did last year. It went way too long, and at some point I started to blame the Mets because they had to move on. And it ultimately, I think, hurt them for the rest of that offseason because they were so concerned about what the fans were thinking for Pete Alonso. Because if Pete Alonso didn't have that playoffs in 2024, nobody wanted him back. Met fans were falling out of favor with him at the end of the season, and we all knew it. If it wasn't for that home run in Milwaukee, I don't think anybody would have cared. And I don't even think the Mets would have re-signed Pete Alonso. Now, that would have been a bad move, considering how good of an offensive season he had. Sure, what are the Mets? Won 80 games instead of 83 and not even make the playoffs? Oh, wait, they didn't. So that is something that you also have to look at. So there is enough options out there. We talked about Okamoto, who is probably going to be posted in the next week or so, who's an option. There's guys like Josh Naylor, and there's a guy that plays multiple positions that we'll talk about in a little bit, who's a free agent as well. There's options out there, and we can find other offensive numbers in other positions where you can find 2 guys to put together in this lineup that can match one of Pete Alonso's numbers, and it spreads out your lineup. And that is something that I've always talked about for a couple of years now, that people are overly concerned about the production that you're going to lose from Pete Alonso, but don't understand what you can bring in from multiple positions to compare to Pete Alonso's numbers, and you spread out your lineup and become an overall better lineup than what the Mets were last year, and that was a top 4 lineup and nothing else. You need to be a top 6 lineup at least in this league now to be considered a top-end team, or at least a top-end offense. The Mets weren't that last year because they relied so much on their top 4 that their other 5 through 9 was so bad that we counted on these guys way too much. And ultimately, it hurt this team. And if you can spread out your lineup a little bit more, if you can spread out the numbers a little bit more and extend your lineup and expand your lineup a little bit more, Pete Alonso is not the end-all be-all. The Mets can still win without Pete Alonso. Can they win with him? Yeah, I think so. But when you see the culture shift that everybody seems to be talking about, Pete Alonso is the easiest choice when he is now a free agent with no comp pick attached to him now, because there is no qualifying offer this year. So more teams are going to go after him based on not worrying about giving up a comp pick. That is the other thing that you have to think about as well. And I think there is a team that's going to give him, like Seattle, Boston, Cincinnati. Those are 3 teams you'll be looking at with Pete Alonso that are willing to fight for him for 5+ years. And the Mets aren't going past 4, in my opinion. I don't even think they're going to go to 4, but I think they would go 4 to match a team if somebody else goes 4, Chris.
I think that they would go 5. I think they could go 5. I think that what you said about the DH thing is definitely a thing that you have to consider for Pete Alonso, though. I mean, that has to be somewhere written, whether it's going to be public knowledge or not. That has to be written in the contract. I mean, Pete Alonso, yeah, he's a great. It's like, this is what I hear from Pete Alonso fans. I'm a Pete Alonso fan. I like Pete Alonso. I don't have any issues with him as much as you do, probably, Rob. But he's not good defensively. He knows how to scoop baseballs, which every single first baseman should understand and know how to do, is scoop a baseball. That is like the bare minimum of a good fielding first baseman, is scooping baseballs. Like, that's what that position is all about, right? You're a big body, scoop baseballs, anything thrown at you, put it in your glove and get it in the glove. But how do you throw? What's your footwork like? What's your range like? All that, Pete Alonso, not good defensively, and we've seen no improvements with. Quite frankly. But the bat, it speaks for itself. Listen, I would not be mad at all if the Mets went above and beyond to keep Pete Alonso, right? I would not be mad. Again, but you need to create a flexible roster where Pete is okay and he's not going to get butt hurt that at a certain point, whether it's in year 2, year 3, year 4, that they're asking him to be a DH because they want to get a guy like Ryan Clifford some reps or any other person that enters the equation in the picture at first base outside of Pete Alonso, because we can do better defensively. And a lot of people are saying this if you watched Vlad Jr. defensively and offensively too, because he had a great postseason for the Blue Jays. I mean, he was undeniable. Like, there were certain plays where I'm like, dude, if that's Pete Alonso and he's making that throw to second base for a double play or should be double play, I don't have any confidence that he doesn't airmail that shortstop that's coming across second base trying to turn that double play. So anyways, that's besides the point, right? Because that's just like hypotheticals, right? But a lot of people are saying you need to keep Pete Alonso and you need to add another star. That's what people are saying. I see in the comment right now. That's a great idea in theory, right? That's a great idea if the Mets were willing to spend as much as the Dodgers, perhaps. And even then, that might be a pipe dream because this Mets team has so many holes in their roster that, yeah, it would be great to play like MLB The Show GM and be like, all right, I want to sign Pete. I'm going to re-sign him to a long-term deal. But then I want to get Bregman. I'm going to sign Bregman to a long-term deal too. That's just not how it works, right? Especially when you're taking a look at, the taxation of Steve Cohen when they go over that luxury tax. And given all the bullpen needs that this team is going to have, the first one being Edwin Diaz, who I'm not sure if we'll talk about or not, but anyways, that should be priority number one, in my opinion, to at least shore up. Like you say, Pete Alonso shouldn't be the priority. I know who should be the priority, and that should be Edwin Diaz, because there's not many. There's maybe one, and outside of that, you're not looking at any replacements that are even on the same stratosphere of Edwin Diaz and what he would give you if he goes elsewhere. And so that's why I think a lot of people are talking about Pete Alonso, is that you have, just like you did last season, maybe if not more this season, you have replacements that you can spread the wealth across your lineup for similar price points, right? I've talked about a handful of options. I'm sure we'll talk about one of the names that you said, and I know which name we're going to talk about, but there's a lot of names that I can point to that are on the market, and I'm like, okay, let's get 2 bats, put it into this lineup. And I know it's kind of like a simple way of thinking. It doesn't always equate to that one value production of what Pete Alonso produces, but also you have to think about it, right? Getting, 18 home runs with one guy, 20 home runs with the next, that's 38 home runs that Pete Alonso will probably give you. Yeah, maybe Pete will hit 40, but I bet you get better defensively. I guarantee you get better defensively. And so, yeah, man, I like, coming from a Pete Alonso fan and a guy myself that is okay with seeing Pete Alonso back onto this team. Again, I'm not saying that it's to the same degree of me being okay with seeing Kodai Senga out the doors, right? A lot of differences there, but I also like, if Pete Alonso is going to hold up this entire offseason, if that's his plan, and I'm sure he's going to, with the way the negotiations played out last year compared to what he posted in 2025, was a really good season for him. He needed that to have a chance at a long-term deal. Like, if I'm the Mets, I'm sure they're going to go out there and offer him an initial baseline deal, and they're going to be like, we are going to focus on maybe even replacing you, right? If the timeline doesn't add up. If you're going to go out there and draw this out for 3 months, you can go wherever you want to. But if you want to go and field some quick offers before we make our decision on next steps for the lineup, then at first base, then we might, perhaps, if you really want to remain a New York Met as much as you say you do, we could match that if the price is right. And so I agree, like, you cannot have, with It would be different if I was confident in the Mets being in a good place roster construction wise outside of first base. Pitching, there's needs. There's money that's going to need to be spent for pitching. There's going to be money that needs to be spent for a variety of bullpen guys, whether it's the back end, right, and middle relief guys. You're talking about adding another bat as well, right? Outside of Pete Alonso, maybe even another bat, depending on what happens on the trade market. If you're parting ways with a guy like Vientos, whatever, if you want to go and get a DH, because we know this team needs a DH, and if they're going to trot out Mark Vientos as our everyday DH, I'm going to be pretty upset and pissed off. There's just too many holes with this team that just make it impossible for the Mets to be okay with themselves to allow Pete Alonso to dictate this whole offseason. I'm not saying I don't want the guy back. I'm not saying that, you shouldn't maybe put an extra step forward to retaining him, but there's limitations on how far the Mets should go before it becomes a little bit of a ridiculous ask, which it's going to be, because Scott Boras is licking his chops at an opportunity to say screw you to the rest of the league, because he did fumble the contract negotiations last year. Let's make no mistake about it. So he's going to be out for extra vengeance and trying to get this right this time for his top client. And I don't know. I just don't have a good feeling about this. I don't have a good feeling about it at all.
Correct. And look, if the Mets had one hole and it happened to be first base and Pete Alonso was a free agent, I think they do everything they can to bring him back. I think he would be priority number one. But honestly, he's not in the top three. He just can't be. When you need top line starters, when you need an entire bullpen for the most part, and you probably need another bat at the very least at what other position, either it's center field, second base, third base, especially if the Mets are going to trade for a top line starter, most of these guys that you could fill those spots with might be gone. And that is something that you have to think about. And this is going to be a quick topic with Edwin Diaz. We both want him back. He's priority number one in our eyes. Most Met fans should think that way as well. He is a hot commodity. We know the Dodgers are reported to be very much in on him. The Mets cannot lose Edwin Diaz to anybody, let alone the Dodgers. Nobody. Edwin Diaz needs to be a New York Met. It doesn't matter how much it costs. I don't care if year 4 of the contract is bad. I just don't. This is the priority right now. For the next 2 years, he's probably going to be one of the best closers in baseball, maybe even 3 years. He's not 35 years old, 36 years old. He's still in that prime range where I think you can get a really good top closer 3 more years at the very least. I think it's going to take 4 years, possibly 5 years, maybe the 5th year being a club option or something like that you have to retain him. And that is something that is obvious to almost all of us. I'm not sure if everybody believes that in the comments, but I know me and Chris do. 100%. Are you a little worried about Edwin Diaz possibly going somewhere else, knowing that there's teams out there that have the money that can spend big on him, maybe more than the Mets are willing to go?
Yeah, I'm worried about the Dodgers. Because, I don't even care about what was said today in the reports, because I did see some stuff that was floating around by some of the reporters that were talking about, the Dodgers being linked to Edwin Diaz. But just because the first report that I saw maybe like 2 weeks ago about the Dodgers is that, they may or may not be in on adding to their lineup. But one thing that they're for sure going to be in on, especially with how much Yoshinobu Yamamoto had to pitch in high leverage situations for them down the stretch of that World Series, which was a crazy series, by the way, is that they're going to be in on a high end back end of the bullpen guy. And any report that I see on the Dodgers adding to their team in areas of need, I definitely believe now. I mean, like, you have to believe them, because they're just going to go out there and do it. And they don't care what the parameters are. They don't care how much money they're going to have to defer. They are hungry for world championships right now. And they've already got back-to-back world championships to add onto their resume. And so they're clearly the favorite to go back-to-back next year until somebody proves otherwise around this league. And I do think that the money is never going to be the issue for the Dodgers to bring in that sort of talent. So I'm just hoping that the Mets are going to be as aggressive as the Dodgers in terms of retaining their guy. because this is a necessity with how much uncertainty this entire bullpen has right now, outside of a couple of guys like AJ Minter coming back and picking up his player option, Brooks Raley, the Mets exercising the club option. There's really not many other guys. Maybe like one or two that you're like, okay, let's go to war with at the back end of this bullpen. And nobody else is even going to come close to replacing Edwin Diaz outside of maybe like Robert Suarez, who you've talked about a plethora of times too. But, it's just one of those things where it's like, you got to sure up the ninth inning if you have a lead locked down, and that's Edwin Diaz. And it would just suck to see him go to the reigning world champions. And so, yeah, I'm a little bit worried about that. What these guys say to the media versus, what they end up doing is completely different. Clearly Edwin Diaz and Pete Alonso, with the words that they've said to the media, it wasn't the same, right? I mean, Edwin Diaz just like completely was like, I love this organization. I have to weigh my decisions. We all knew he was going to opt out, but like, at least he was playing it to where there was some sentimental value there, whereas Pete Alonso wasn't. But you never know at the end of the day. I mean, business is business. Could anybody really blame him if he does walk to the Dodgers and they give him the contract that he's looking for? And if the Mets are like, come back to us on 1 year less because you've been with us for so long and we're gonna get this, like, that doesn't play. The sentimental stuff doesn't play with these guys.
No.
And as it shouldn't, because they're trying to maximize both of these guys, and Pete Alonso and Edwin Diaz. This is their last chance at a long-term contract. This is their very last chance at one. So, the Mets are going to have an uphill battle here, but I think no matter what, if you're asking me if I'm going to overpay one of these guys to keep them in a Mets uniform, given, the needs of this roster right now and the replacements or lack thereof that are on the market to, fill those positions and backfill those positions that they leave, I'm overpaying Edwin Diaz. I'm not even thinking twice about it. And that's tough for me to even say, because normally I subscribe to the philosophy and the ideology that, like, listen, bullpen guys, I don't care what your name is, you're replaceable. But there's a handful of guys in this league that you cannot say the same for. Like Josh Hader maybe is one of them. Edwin Diaz is for sure one of them. And it just has to happen, Rob. I'm sorry. That has to be priority number one. I've talked about it on my channel, but yeah, there is a real concern in my mind that, he's going to definitely test the open market because he's opted out already. And I think that there's a real possibility that he walks.
Yeah, I think that if the Mets have to go the extra year to keep him, you do it. I don't care if the Dodgers offer him a crazy deal, which is like 6 years for whatever reason, because they want him so bad, and they defer freaking $100 million of that. I don't care. You got to do it. He is more a guy you have to fight for more than a guy like Pete Alonso. If you have to go that extra year, extra 10, 15, $20 million for the entirety of the contract, you do it. Because he is a difference maker when it comes to a closer. Yes, you can go out and get Robert Suarez for probably a 3-4 year deal, who would be very good, but we don't know how this guy is going to play in New York. We know what Edwin Diaz can do in New York in big moments. He's proven he can do it. Robert Suarez we know it was a great arm, but it's a question mark in New York. That's what you always worry about sometimes. Now, you always go out to get the better player. I think Edwin Diaz is better. So you get the better player that you already know can pitch in New York that you already had. That is something that you have to worry about more than anything else this offseason early on. This Edwin Diaz thing can't prolong too long. The Mets need to be very aggressive with Edwin Diaz. I mean, give him a very damn good offer right off the bat. Start off with 4 years for whatever amount of money. He's probably going to want more than $20 million, so around 23 to 25 million. If it's 4 years, 100, it is what it is. Start off with that. That's a big number. And if the Dodgers go another year and another 25 million, you do it as well. That's what you have to do when it comes to Edwin Diaz. It's the one guy you have to overpay for contractually to keep him on this team. Somebody you can't lose out on. Even though Robert Suarez has a great arm and good numbers, you don't know how he's going to perform in the big moments in the ninth inning in New York. You just never know. Diaz can do it. That's why you pay him the extra amount. All right, so next up, when it comes to the New York Mets and what they should do or should not do, is a guy like Cody Bellinger. Is he high on the Mets priority list? I think he is. I think he fits the David Stearns mold perfectly. He talks about, run with the, defense and, run prevention and all that fun stuff and versatility. Cody Bellinger brings all of that. He can play center. He can play all three outfield positions very well. He basically beat the Mets in left field in the Subway Series with his glove and his bat. He can play first base very well. And he is a guy that can probably hit 25 home runs. I'm not going to 35 plus. I don't know how many. I think he hit 30 something home runs this year. He's not going to hit that in Citi Field, I don't think. But he can hit 25 home runs. But he's a guy that you can sign Cody Bellinger and still sign Pete Alonso, because you can put Cody Bellinger in center field, or you can put him in left field and DH Brandon Nimmo. You can do a lot with Bellinger if you sign him, because he doesn't jam you up at a position. Like if you're looking for a center fielder, you can move Cody Bellinger to first base. If you're really thinking about a first baseman other than Pete Alonso, or even just another defensive good first baseman that can hit a little bit, you can put Cody Bellinger in center field. I think he's very high on the list in the free agent market and position players for any position you want to talk about with him. Center field or first base, Chris. I like Cody Bellinger. Am I going to overpay for Cody Bellinger? I think everybody's overpaid. So I don't think anybody's going to be underpaid, to be quite honest with you. He had a really good year this year. You see he can play in New York. I know he's another lefty bat, and people are concerned about lefty-righty. I don't care. I don't give a shit. Get the best player. I don't want a worse player because of numbers. I don't want a worse player because of matchups. I don't want a right-handed batter in the lineup because the matchups are better. If the better hitter is the left-handed bat, you leave him in the lineup. Most of these guys can hit left-handers. And we saw with the Mets this year that our left-handed hitters hit better against lefties than our right-handed hitters. But yet, too many times this year, there was righties in the lineup because of matchups. Get the best player. And if Cody Bellinger suits this team well, which I think he does, you get him. And you worry about the other position you need to worry about the rest of the offseason. I think Cody Bellinger is I'm not going to say a top priority, but I think he's in the top 5 easily for the Mets high on their list when it comes to position player-wise.
So this is the thing. It's actually a really tough topic to talk about with Cody Bellinger. First of all, because the market for him is just going to be absolutely crowded. In addition to the Yankees trying to re-sign him, there's going to be so many teams that are going to be in on him. Second of all, I would have to disagree with what you said, though, in that I don't think that the Mets would re-sign Pete if they go after a guy like Cody Bellinger. I don't think that, for 2 reasons, right? One is that David Stearns actually said today, Carson Bench, top prospect for the Mets, has the ability to make this team out of spring training if he proves what he needs to prove, right? And so that would theoretically solve your bat in center field, and then you'd be signing Cody maybe for like a hybrid outfield first base kind of deal. But the other thing is that this guy's going to be asking for a long-term contract too. And I have to stick true to my theory here in that, this is not MLB The Show. Like, you can't give 2 6-year deals out worth damn near $200 million to both Pete Alonso and Cody Bellinger. The contract valuation right now and what Bellinger is scheduled to make from whatever contract with whatever team he signs with this offseason is around 6 years, $180 million, give or take, right? That's around just about, that's actually spot on, $30 million AAV. I can see 28, I can see 29, I can see even 30 as well. His bat up and down. He's had good years, he's had bad years. I'll call that for what it is. But he does seem like a David Stearns type of player because he's versatile. He's more versatile than Pete, but Pete Alonso, if you're talking about offensive numbers strictly and putting back into this lineup, you're going to take Pete Alonso all day long. I would have to imagine. But that's kind of where I'm at a loss here, because I like Cody. I would definitely be on board with signing him. Long term for Cody Bellinger makes me a little bit worried, though, because we have seen some pretty brutal years from him, but we've seen some pretty high upside years, especially this past year, with that short porch at Yankee Stadium. Do I think he's going to hit 30 plus the City Field like you just said? No. We did say the same thing about Juan Soto, and he put 40 over the fence, and we're like, okay, maybe we can expect 30 plus, not quite 40, but he ended up going damn near 40 as well in his first year as a New York Met. Yeah, I don't know. If you're asking me Cody Bellinger versus Pete Alonso, who I would rather have on this team in 2026, I still have to give the nod to Pete Alonso for a long-term contract as long as he's okay with moving to DH in a couple of years from now. But also with the emergence of Carson Bench, barring anything like drastic that the Mets do, I'm talking about like a Skubal trade or just a blockbuster trade with Carson Bench's name in it, for a pitcher or what have you. I don't know where Bellinger goes here. I mean, there's also a case to make for Brandon Nimmo potentially being a DH in the future, and Brandon Nimmo is just like, I think that's where the problems start with this Mets lineup is Brandon Nimmo. I mean, I'm not talking about his offensive production. I'm just talking about where he's going to occupy, what position he's going to occupy in the field. Because that guy's got about maybe one more solid year of fielding left in him before the wheels fall off.
That's why I want Cody Bellinger in here. Is the fact that if let's say Carson Bench does make it out of spring training, looks really good, and you put Cody Bellinger at first base, now you can platoon Bellinger, you can put him at first base, left field, you can do what you need to do, and that's why I think Cody Bellinger is more likely than Pete Alonso at this point. Because if Stearns is talking about Carson Bench as a possibility making the team out of spring training, then Cody Bellinger makes more sense. Because let's just say that Cody Bellinger is the guy that the Mets are thinking about playing him at first base. Let's say Pete Alonso is probably out of the question at that point. You're not signing both of them. That doesn't make sense in my opinion, even though I think you should do it, but they're not going to do that. But Cody Bellinger be a first baseman. If Carson Bench doesn't work out during spring training and doesn't look ready, you put Cody Bellinger in center field and you get a defensive guy for first base. And you worry about that, you're going to get 25 home runs, maybe close to 30 for Bellinger. You can get 10 to 15 home runs from somebody, in my opinion. That adds up to the total or close to the total or exact total of the power numbers for Pete Alonso. So, Bellinger's an interesting thing. Like, would I be against it? No. But you're right. He had years that were really bad. But I also think the Dodgers kind of screwed him over as well. After he got hurt, they kind of set him to the side, because he did get hurt in that World Series COVID year. I think it was when he dislocated his shoulder, and that kind of messed him up in his MVP type season. And I think the Dodgers kind of like pushed him to the side a little bit. And that kind of messed him up. So I think he's going to be a solid ball player. I don't think he's going to be as great, but I think he's going to be very solid. So I wouldn't be against it, but it depends on what is David Stearns thinking here. Does Cody Bellinger 6 years feel more versatile and feel more opportunistic when it comes to Cody Bellinger? Like, they could see him still be a really good player in 6 years over Pete Alonso? Because that's the other conversation you got to have as well.
Well, okay. So with this Bellinger discussion, at that point, how many lefties is too many lefties on this Mets team?
Well,
let's count them out. Let's count them out though. Like Bellinger, Bench, Lindor, Nimmo, Soto,
a lot.
McNeil if he stays, right? Maybe there's one more I'm forgetting, but like, that's also crazy. I don't think any other team in this sport is sporting, a lineup that has 5-6 lefties, right then and there.
But a lot of them hit lefties
yeah.
well that are currently on the Mets. So that's something that you have to take into account as well. And matchups shouldn't be an issue if guys that are lefties hitting lefties pretty well.
Yeah, well, and listen, I know Lindor's a switch hitter, but let's be honest, he's better from the left side anyways than he is the right
side. And Beatty as well,
so,
if he sticks around, yeah.
Right. So if he sticks around, that's for Beatty. That's a spoiler alert for what my video is going to be tomorrow, and that's dropping tomorrow night. Because there could be a chance he doesn't stay around. Anyways, yeah, but you know what though, like, if you're asking me, I don't know. I saw a comment here between Alex Bregman and Bellinger. I'm like, I think I'd still have to go with Alex Bregman, just given,
Oh,
you
I
know, the
agree.
yeah, I would have to go with Bregman. I
But
don't
you
think
have to
that
bring back Pete
Bellinger.
Alonso, don't you? Don't see, that's the problem. If you bring back Alex Bregman, you probably have to bring back Pete Alonso. The only reason why is because then you can go young in center field and go with Carson Bench, even if he's not great in spring training. Then just go with him. Hopefully, he's good defensively and work on his bat throughout the year.
Well, that's where I've been talking about Okamoto on my channel, and it's so disheartening to hear that the Mets aren't really going to make a pursuit of him, at least right now that we know of. Because I think that if you do bring a guy like Bregman in, you make Beatty either your second baseman, you can float McNeil out in the trade talks like we've been hearing, and then you can sign Okamoto, and that's a really good defensive alignment right there. And that also, given the Okamoto power abilities and Bregman, that'll give you 20 to 25, in any given year. That's also replacing Pete Alonso's home run production right there in that split 2-for-1 deal that we talked about. But anyways, that's besides the point. Yeah, I think, but like I said, this just goes into like how many true like different scenarios the Mets could really have if Pete Alonso is not a New York Met, right? I just think that there's a lot of different avenues they could take, and this is where the part of David Stern's job gets really tough. That's where it gets really tough. So
And
we'll
plus, he's
see.
cheap.
What was that?
I said plus he's cheap.
Well, that then you're not getting two long-term players right then and there to begin with if you're saying that. And so this is where I'm going to say is that I I'm going to say this. This might be a hot take. This might not be a hot take. I don't know. I'd rather give Pete Alonso the 6 years than Cody Bellinger the 6 years. I think Cody Bellinger is the true 4-year contract type of player this offseason. And I think that he's going to be shooting for 6, just as Pete Alonso is. I wouldn't be surprised if either of those guys signed for 5 or 4. I'd be a little bit surprised if Pete Alonso signed for 4, but definitely not 5. I'd rather just give the extra years to Pete Alonso, back to saying this for the 4th time, if he agrees to be a
Correct.
DH. Because I think that Cody Bellinger's value will diminish quicker than Pete Alonso's, just given the differences in their offensive ability.
And his
That's what
his
I'll say.
valuable defensive capabilities could deteriorate over the years when it comes to Bellinger.
Correct.
Correct. I
Correct.
agree with that. So to put the starting pitching and the trade market and free agency together, since time is limited here, um I guess an overall question. What do you want the Mets to do? I mean, I think we all want 2 top line starters here. I think everybody probably feels that's what they should do. Let's say they do that. There's a lot of options out there in the free agent market and the trade market. What would we already know what we said that we probably think Freddie Peralta and MI is probably what Stearns probably is going to lean to. But what do you want them to do if there's one trade starting pitcher on the market that the Mets will get and one free agent target for the Mets to get? What do you want? Not with David Stearns up, but what would you want if you can get one trade and one free agent top line starter here for the New York Mets and put them together?
I mean, I don't think Schoolball is going to be traded at the end of the day, but like, of course, who wouldn't sign up for that? You know what I mean? Who would not sign up for that? And you talk about like that trio. I think you said Schoolball, Sandy, and I forgot what other. Oh, Joe Ryan, right? You
Sure.
said Joe Ryan. There's a possibility that none of those guys get traded. You know what I mean? I think Joe Ryan would be definitely a second favorite. I think of all those names, Sandy is maybe the most likely, but now you're talking about a Marlins team, that got a little bit of a taste of winning towards the end of the season, made a valiant effort, and now they're telling executives apparently that they want to be aggressive in terms of spending, and adding onto their team this offseason. And so I would trade for any 3 of those guys in an instant. And then depending on the level, because there's tiers to this, right? Schoolball's 1, Joe Ryan's probably 2, and then Sandy, I know he's been great, prior Cy Young, but he's number 3 in the hierarchy of that list in terms of talent going into 2026. Then you're talking about a difference, right? If you go get a guy like Schoolball, you have to think about a contract extension. You're probably going to go out there and not splurge as much in terms of money valuation on the free agent that you sign. that's where I would take a guy like Dylan Cease, right? Or depending on what type of deal Michael King wants, I'd give it to him too. But Dylan Cease, I think, is going to be in there for, a year, maybe 2 years as an opt-out to try to get him back on track and back onto the open market, kind of like a Pete Alonso deal, but from the pitching side. But if you go get a guy like Sandy, I mean, he's got another year left, but, relatively inexpensive, like you mentioned earlier. You have a lot more ability to splurge on a potential free agent. So there's levels to this. Is essentially what I'm saying. And we have to keep in track, the cap space, not maybe the space, that's the wrong word for now until the CBA negotiations kick in, but the luxury tax, you have to take that into account. So I don't know. It's just so hard to talk about the trades right now of the starting pitching because, like I just said, I can see a scenario where all three of those guys I just mentioned are not moving on from their current teams, and they're going to just ride into the season with what they got and then evaluate at the deadline, etc. I mean, I also mentioned a team like the Mariners, who have maybe some pitching to give depending on their needs. This is where I didn't talk about this specifically, but this scenario of floating Brett Beatty as a trade candidate. I know Mets fans are really attached to Brett Beatty. Trust me, I'm a Brett Beatty fan too. Was really happy to see his emergence in 2025. But if you're talking about a guy like Alex Bregman, who can come in and play third base, if you're going to keep McNeil and just worry about second base in the future, Brett Beatty's the guy to get rid of, especially if you can get some starting pitching in the doors.
Yep.
Eugenio Suarez is going to be a free agent for them. They're going to need a third baseman. You know what I mean? And so that's where I can see that happening. But I don't know of many other teams that will be floating top line starters out there right now. Which goes back and I don't want to open this can of worms with you, Rob, because I know your opinion on this, but which makes the Garrett Crochet sweepstakes last off season so heartbreaking. But you know what? We're not looking in the rearview mirror anymore. We're on to bigger and better things. So
And well, the thing with the Garrett Crochet, why I think it's kind of similar to the Tarek Skubal, is the fact that even though Garrett Crochet had a lot of years left, he did not want to stay on that rookie deal, so to speak. He wanted the contract once he was traded. I don't think Tarek Skubal is a guy that is automatically going to free agency. I know he's a Boris guy, but if he's willing to talk negotiations with Detroit, even though that kind of broke down rather quickly, he was willing to sign an extension. I don't think Tariq Skubal is going to be a hard guy to get extended when he knows he gets traded to a team like the Mets that has the money. And yeah, you might have to go a little low on like the free agent market. Let's say, you bring in, a lower end guy that's maybe a middle of the rotation guy from the free agent market. But if you bring in Tarek Skubal here, even for 1 year, and put him with McLean, and you can get another free agent pitcher that's probably a middle of the rotation guy, not somebody that's, top line, but somebody pretty good. I'm okay with that because I do think the Mets will do everything they can to sign him throughout the year or even still in this offseason if there is an offseason, if they get him early enough for like during the winter meetings and have a couple of months before the season starts. I think the Mets are going to get Tariq Skubal. I don't think David Stearns is messing around with a guy like that. I think he's a guy that you're willing to trade many prospects for, considering that there's holes that you can fill still with the guys you currently have and guys on the market. Tariq Skubal is a guy that I'm willing to take the risk and have him for 1 year. Have him pitch here for 1 year. Good or bad. I think you could still sign him throughout the season or any offseason when you trade for him. And I still think the Mets have a really good chance to sign him long-term when he becomes a free agent. And who the hell knows after the 26th season with the CBA expiring? We don't even know if we're going to have baseball in 27. So I'm not worrying about 2027. I'm worrying about 2026. Go get Tariq Skubal. Do whatever you can to get him. I don't care what it takes. I really don't. I think the only guy that is kind of untouchable is Nolan McLean. I honestly believe that. I even think Carson Bench is a possibility. If it takes one less prospect, but you have to add Carson Bench, I do it. If that means you have to go sign Cody Bellinger or, trade for a Luis Robert for center field, I do it. I would do it. I'm sick and tired of being second fiddle and getting the secondary, tertiary guy in the offseason every year. Get the best guy out there. You're fucking the New York Mets. You're a big market. You're the New York Mets. You're a New York team. I don't want to hear you being second fiddle because you know what's going to happen? There's going to be a team that you're trying to beat going to get a guy like Therese Kubel, if not in the offseason, but at the deadline, if the Tigers aren't winning. And there's other guys as well that you should get. So you take them away from teams that you're fighting against. That's why you got to get Edwin Diaz. You can't let him go to the Dodgers. Same reason why you can't let other top players go to the Dodgers again and again and again, along with other teams in the NL on the National League. You got to worry about that. Tariq Skubal is a guy that the Mets need to go hard after. And if that means you get Tariq Skubal and getting a middle of the road pitcher for your middle of the rotation, I'm okay with that. That's what they got to do. So if you want, I would take Tariq Skubal and give me a Merrill Kelly. I'd be fine with that. Pairing him with McLean and Peterson and whatever the hell you want to do with Clay Holmes as your number 5, because Clay Holmes should be a number 5. I know he pitched well, but be careful with the innings he just had. Because if anybody thinks he's going to be okay pitching another 160-plus innings, you're going to be insane. He's going to get hurt. I'm sorry for everybody thinking that that's not true. You know, you don't want to pay big-time pitchers because of injury, but the guys you bring in even for short-term deals, that was a big part of your rotation this year, even though he shouldn't be, never pitched this many innings in his career. Be careful trusting Clay Holmes to be a big part of this rotation, especially in your top 3. If Clay Holmes is your number 3 guy going into the season, be careful what you wish for, guys. So Clay Holmes needs to be a number 4 or 5 guy, in my opinion. I think Brandon Sproat could be possibly in the trade, so I'm not even worried about him in the rotation yet. Until those trades are done, I'm not worried about the kids except for McLean in this rotation. I don't care. I'm not dying on the ledge here if Sproat and Tong aren't a part of this long-term plan for the New York Mets. I'm just not anymore. I'm sick and tired of waiting for prospects. You can't wait because you wait too long. Lindor's too old. Nimmo's too old. You know, if you keep Pete Alonso will be too old. You're going to have these guys in the mid-30s before your best guys become prominent pitchers. And then when they become prominent pitchers, now they want money. And now you just fall into that trap again. So Tariq Skubal, Merrill Kelly, that's what I would do for this rotation to surround out this lineup, and I would trade Kodai Senga. Let me just go with, we talked about Alex Bregman. I think we would like Alex Bregman. This is real quick. Do you think he's a possibility? Again, Pete Alonso. That's the problem.
Yeah, if McNeil is actually a tradable candidate, although you know what, no, I at the end of the day, I do see the scenario playing out where Brett Baty's just going to be a third baseman for the Mets. So, I as much as I would like Bregman to be a possibility for the Mets, I'm trying to speak it into existence. I just don't see it happening. I don't see that fit being something that's up, the alley and the mindset of David Stern. So I'll say no.
Yeah, I think Cody Bellinger is more. I know that's not the same position, but I think Bellinger is more of an option than Alex Bregman. Unless all options fall off the table and Bregman's still out there, then the Mets probably don't have a choice. Oh yeah, I think he's a possibility if all other options fall off the table. What about Bo Bichette? That's a guy that came back from injury, had a really good World Series. A lot of people are projecting him to be a second baseman now, which fits right into the Mets mold of what they need. Dude, he is a righty. That's a good sign. I know everybody gets excited about those matchups. He is a right-handed bat. Is that a possibility for the new? He's young. I like him. If you're not going to go get Pete Alonso, give me a prominent bat and give me a guy like Bo Bichette. I would take him in a heartbeat to play second base and, throw Josh Naylor at first base, and I'd be very okay with that offseason if Carson Ben's going to be your center fielder. What about Bo Bichette?
I'm a no on him because I think he's going to want more. I think he's going to want like 7 to 8 years. I made a video about Bo Bichette, actually. I think it released yesterday. So I'm a no on Bo Bichette. I like his bat too. I think he's a competent bat. I do have some issues with maybe some of the power numbers, just given how much of a free swinger he is. He doesn't walk at a high clip. He did reduce his strikeout rate. He has led the American League in hits, two years of his career so far. I think he's a really good player. Offensively, he just offers nothing else that's desirable for me. No defense, no speed, no nothing else. And I don't even really care that he's going to be transitioning over to second base, where I think that he's going to be a lot better defensively because he's not a shortstop. But he's not a major league shortstop. The numbers, fielding numbers say that. I think that would be a mistake to give a guy like that 8 years. Just like I wouldn't go 6 years for Bellinger, I won't go 8 years for Bichette. I think there's levels to this. And like I said, these guys like Bo Bichette, 5-6 years, sure, let's do it. 7-8, not really. No thanks. I'm good on Bo Bichette. And I think that, if all else fails, okay, sure. But then you're talking about desperation mode. And we all know that, wheeling and dealing in desperation mode is not something that David Stearns is going to do either. So I don't think the Mets will be in on Bo Bichette. And it would go against everything that David Stearns has said about run prevention, because he is a terrible fielder. So I'm good on him.
All right. So before we end the show, there's a guy that we didn't talk about, Shota Imanaga, who is now a free agent. What about him being an option? Okay.
Yeah, I know that it depends on, again, with a lot of these guys, it depends on the contract valuation. Of course, it's going to be elevated like all contracts are, especially given the competition. I know that a lot of people have concerns about Imanaga. Listen, there's 2 years of sample size and 2 years only of sample size that you have to work with at the major league level for Imanaga. He had a really good rookie campaign. Of course, he wasn't going to produce what he produced in his rookie year and year 2. He still had a really good year. Yes, he did crumble in the playoffs. I think that if you're talking about free agency, he's probably going to want a 4 or 5 year deal, perhaps, I would say. Do I think it's realistic? I don't think the Mets are going to do it. I wouldn't expect the Mets to do it, but I would be open and willing to at least entertain that. I think I'd go after Imai, given the age, first and foremost, but Imanaga would be, I like Imanaga, I'll say that. And that's just the fact of the matter. I see a lot of Mets fans are saying, stay away from Imanaga this, stay away from Imanaga that. He gives up so many home runs. He does. That's true. But, I think that he would also be, he's probably going to, and this is the one issue that I have with Imanaga, is that he's going to want to get paid like a frontline starter, even though I think that he's a number 2 or number 3 as well in the rotation. So whoever is the cheaper option of him or Imai coming out of, after he's posted or when he's posted, I would probably take, but I'm not completely out on Imanaga, is what I'll say.
Yeah, it's hard to judge him mostly on Wrigley Field when the wind blows out a lot of the times, especially a lot of day games where the wind blows out, which is always concerning. We don't know how that would play in Citi Field in a bigger ballpark where the winds are a lot different than Wrigley Field, but I wouldn't be against it, obviously. One more thing before we go, Ketel Marte, he might be on the trade block. That's another guy I don't know if the Mets will go after, but it would be smart to go after him considering he just got a contract a couple of years ago, if I'm not mistaken.
Yeah, I would do it. I would go after him. I'll probably end up talking about him sometime on my channel. I think that I'm not really sure what the recent rumors. I'm not going to even pretend to know what the recent rumors are with Ketel Marte or Ketel Marte. But that's a guy that I would definitely like in this lineup. And I think that, if you have the ability to move McNeil for whatever value to create that roster spot and add a bat like Ketel Marte in this lineup, I'm not even hesitating whatsoever. And I think that David Stearns shouldn't either. 100% I'm in.
There you go, guys. So episode 3 is now in the books of Mets Hot Stove, a long hour-and-a-half show. We haven't done this for a while, so trying to get back into the flow here for this off-season. But we have a lot more videos, a lot more live streams going forward with the off-season starting to kick up a little bit more with a lot more rumors. Thank you guys for watching Mets Hot Stove episode 3. We'll see you next time, guys. As always, Met fans, let's go Mets, and we'll see you next time, guys. Good night.
Let's go Mets.
Meet the Mets, meet the Mets. Step right up and greet the Mets. Bring your kiddies, bring your wife. Guaranteed to have a